let me briefly introduce our panel for you. On my left, Diaa Mohamed. You may remember Diaa has been on a panel with us last year. The only difference this year, he's grown a beard in the last 12 months. Diaa, of course, is the man behind the MyPeace organisation, a group that is seeking to promote understanding between Christians and Muslims. On his left is Sam Green. Sam comes from Tasmania. We won't hold that against you, Sam. And Sam works for the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students and has a special interest in understanding the dialogue between Christians and Muslims. And further to his left, Kuranda Seyit. Kuranda is the founder and executive director of the Forum on Australia's Islamic Relations, or FAIR as an acronym. He is an established documentary filmmaker and has had films screen on the SBS, for example, Always a Visitor. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us again on the panel. Well, just by way of background, our topic today, is there scope for Sharia law in Australia? Why are we asking this question, you may ask? Well, it was last year in 2011 that the Australian Federation of Islamic Councils made a submission to a parliamentary inquiry on policy called for Muslims to offer religious pluralism. They were seeking the opportunity to have, in particular, their marriage laws that are in Sharia law incorporated into our legal framework. The then Commonwealth Attorney General, Robert McClelland, said that there was actually no place for Sharia law in Australian society. He said, for instance, that as our citizenship pledge makes clear, coming to Australia means obeying Australian laws and upholding Australian values. Australia's brand of multiculturalism promotes integration. If there's an inconsistency between cultural values and the rule of law, then Australia law wins out. So with that sort of in the background, I might turn then to Diaa and ask, well, do you see an inconsistency between Australian law and your life as a Muslim in this country?
No, I don't. As a Muslim, I was born and raised in this country. I'm a practicing Muslim. I'm living under Sharia law. One of the laws under Sharia law is to obey the law of the land. Mm-hmm. So by obeying the law of this land, which is common law essentially, I'm practicing Sharia law. I pray, I fast, I try to do all the pillars of Islam, and I've been doing that freely and with no problems at all. So there's no inconsistency at all. What I think it's been referred to, though, is things like marriage, divorce, inheritance, those sorts of things. And I think that can be implemented. I mean, am I actively seeking it? No. But I know it's in the UK, they've done it, and it's worked well. I'm not, like I said, actively seeking it, but I'm not opposed to it as well.
I think there's a tongue-in-cheek question that already has come. Do we need to grow a beard when Sharia law comes into effect in Australia?
It depends who you ask.
Okay. I might turn to Kuranda. Kuranda, do you have a similar view to Diaa? Do you have freedom in this country to practice Sharia?
Well, yeah, so I don't have a beard, so that's the first freedom. The great thing about Australia is that the system that we've created here in Australia is one that allows religious freedom, religious expression, and basically is a tolerant society, not in a negative way, in a positive way. We celebrate diversity, and we allow people to be able to practice their faith the way that they want to do it. And so I live my life according to Sharia here in Australia. There's no actual Sharia law which that I am answerable to, except in a personal way. So whether that's through fasting, marriage, prayer, all those aspects of my Sharia. I go to Friday prayer every Friday. A part of my Sharia is to attend a Friday mosque. No one stops me from doing it. In actual fact, when I used to work here in the city in Castlereagh Street, every lunchtime on Fridays, I'd go down to there was a local building here that we'd have Friday prayers. So my boss would allow me to leave.
So it sounds like you've got freedom for association in this country, freedom of speech, those sorts of things. So are there any areas of tension or none? I mean, is this a non-issue? There is no need to change the legal system at all?
I don't think anyone's calling to change the legal system at all. I'm yet to see anyone. I think there's one person I've heard in the media and the like saying, we want to implement Sharia law. I mean, as a Muslim, I'd love Sharia law. I think Sharia law is God-given law. But in a population where it's 2% Muslim, 98% non-Muslim, I don't like the chances of it happening. Okay. And there's no one really actively calling for it.
I might come back later to that, the idea that as a Muslim you'd like to see it. We'll come back later to that in a moment. Sam, is that how you see it so far? There's freedom and there's no need to change the laws?
Yes, certainly. I think that for many in the Australian community, we hear the word Sharia and we think hand cutting. And we need to realise that Sharia is every aspect of Islam, and that within the freedom of Australia, Muslims are able to practice most of their Sharia anyway. So when people are calling for Sharia, we mustn't think, that they're not able to do something. They're able to do a lot of their religion already, a lot of their Sharia already. There are some elements they can't do, and that's because our legal system has decided that those elements are undesirable and we don't want them.
Okay. So it sounds like from the description earlier that really Sharia is the Islamic way of living. It's a total system.
Islamic law.
Islamic law. And it covers really all dimensions of your life, be it personal, communal.
Every aspect.
Every aspect of life. Okay. So if that's the case, do you find that being in a minority group here, 2% or so, that there are any limitations perhaps in the political sphere, if perhaps not in the personal sphere, you can do your prayers, but are there any limitations at the sort of more political level?
None that I can see. I mean, I'm not sure.
I think what you'll find is, it depends on the individual, but some Muslims who say are maybe more literal in their interpretation, maybe a little bit more serious about the way they approach things, may see things that they can't do. For example, I know people who will say, and there are people in Australia who won't vote because of other principles, but I know people who will say, I'm not going to engage in this voting system because I believe that it's not Islamic, and they may put in a donkey vote or they may not vote at all. Okay. But their reason is because they're against this whole system which allows certain parties to get to power and then make decisions based on flawed reference points, and for example maybe supporting a war in Afghanistan or whatever. So on reasons of principle you'll find Muslims who will boycott certain aspects of a democratic society. But that's just depends on that individual. But I think by and large most Muslims in Australia follow the system that they live within to the best of their ability within the Islamic framework, and as long as they don't feel that they're doing anything against their religion, they feel comfortable to be able to live within the system. Okay.
Well, I guess I want to say, and I'll come to you, Sam, in a moment on this one, do you see a potential conflict, though, between almost the theocratic or totalising system of Islam and democracy? Because citing the European Court of Human Rights from 2001, they ruled that Sharia law is, quote, not compatible with democracy. And the context of that was the court was ruling on the Turkish Constitutional Court's decision to ban the Islamist party Rafa on the grounds that, quote, democracy is the antithesis of Sharia. So do we have something in Islam that we don't have, for instance, in Christianity, this totalising theocratic system?
Well, in Islam, Islamic law covers every point of life, and in law we say the Holy Quran is everything. It's the constitution. It's common law. It's family law. It's civil law. It covers every aspect of one's life, and it's the perfect system. As a Muslim, we believe that Islamic law was revealed by the Creator, and who better to give us the platform on which to live than the Creator to us who are the created. So in Islamic law, there's nothing that's left untouched that man would then have to come and try to conquer something up and try to make it work. Because as a rule of thumb, obviously man is flawed. So to make up a flawless law is not possible by the human.
Do you see this as one of the distinctions?
Well, absolutely, and I want to agree with what he's just said there, because I've got a book, and if you're interested to know what Sharia law is, you can find out. There are books like this which list what the Sharia is, and it tells you everything. So Islam is a total system about how you go to the toilet, how you do absolutely every area of life. There is a law for it. And this is a clear distinction with Christianity. Christianity has, the Bible is a collection of not just one prophet, but of all the prophets, so from Moses through to Jesus. And when we look at that, we see that there are laws in it on how you are to live, But there's also large sections of wisdom, and then there's large sections of freedom or liberty. And so the Christian guidance is not just having a law for every single area of life. The Christian understanding, which comes from all the prophets, is that there is a law aspect, but there's also a wisdom aspect, which we get from the books of Proverbs and the rest. And then, of course, there are areas of liberty where you are free to do something or not to do something. And so for us, it's a very different system. It's not a totalitarian system like that.
But what about this issue of sort of separation, for want of a better term, between church and state? How is that distinguished from Islam?
Sure. Islam, and again, I want to make the distinction between Muslims and Islam, because I think there is a difference there that we need to understand. When I make comments about Islam, I'm talking about my reading of the Sharia, my reading from the Quran. I'm not talking about what a Muslim on the ground may think. That's going to be up to him, and I don't know unless I ask him. But I can make statements about the Quran because it's available and the Islamic law is available, so we can look at it. Now, one of the big differences is that Christianity and Islam have two different attitudes to the state. In terms of Christianity, we have this idea that all of us have sinned, and even in regards to us running a government, we will sin and we will fail. And so Christians build in a lot of checks and balances into the governments that they're involved in, because the Bible actually says that we can't run God's government here on earth. That when we've tried to do it, we fail, and that ultimately only God can run his government. And that's the message of the gospel, that Jesus has come to bring that government of God, and that only he can do it. Islam is much more positive. It actually says, no, we can make the theocracy. And personally, I find it to be idealistic as well, because they keep holding it up as the ideal. And although I'm told that there's no true people doing it, the ideal still drives them on, even though I think it doesn't have a good track record, as Christian theocracies haven't had a good track record.
Do we, Kuranda, have an example currently of the ideal of it actually happening, a Islamic theocracy?
Well, there's a reason why that ideal doesn't exist today, and mainly because it's the fact that there is so much corruption in the world, and even our Muslim leaders have been corrupted or have been exploited, and they've taken these regimes and for their own personal benefit. And so we've got Islamic countries, all bar a few, being run by fairly tyrannical, despotic regimes. And we all see it on the media every day. Assad in Syria, Mubarak in Egypt, and the list could go on and on. But I think that what I think there needs to be a very clear understanding of why Islam and other religions came around in the first place, from the beginning of creation, if you want to call it, or humanity. People naturally or automatically lost their way for whatever reason, and so we've had this guidance through what we call prophets and God giving that message. Now, Sharia is basically a way for us to maintain a moral fibre in society, to create a high moral standard, and that's what Sharia is about. So for us to maintain a high moral fabric in society, we need to keep those values, and obviously today we call it democratic values. They're very similar to Sharia style values, because in essence, democracy and Sharia don't actually conflict. What a lot of Islamic societies are based on democratic decision making. And we don't just have one guy at the top say, well, this is how it's going to be, or I'll chop your hand off. It's all made by consensus with the community, and Islam is a work in progress that is constantly changing. And that's how every society is. Our laws, our British laws, our common law, have developed this over centuries, and we've implemented that over the years, and we've adjusted that using Parliament. So that's how Islam forms as well. There's no difference between Islam, how Islamic societies run, and say a Western society runs.
So how does that? So if I may cut you, how does that fit with the concept that there's a book that you can have Sharia law?
So all human beings have the same needs. We want to live in a society where we feel safe, we feel respected, we feel free to be able to coexist. And what you have here, this is the reliance of the traveller, which is mainly around fiqh. Fiqh is an aspect of Sharia which is the jurisprudence of Islam. So that covers things like marriage and divorce, or as was mentioned, some other aspects of personal aspects of how to live your life. Now, in that sense, Islam is very particular. It's very pedantic. And Islam has done 1,400 years of research and development of these ideas and developed them over time, and we apply that to our daily living. But that's very different from the moral and, I suppose, the moral and ethical sides of society, where all of us have universal values that we all share and implement in our laws. And that's how Islam does it, just as everybody else.
Okay, so that sounds that there should be really no reason for people to be concerned
There's
at all.
absolutely no reason to be concerned.
So if Sharia has the potential to support the moral fibre of our country, Sam, are there anything from your perspective that you would find objectionable about Sharia?
Well, certainly in terms of many aspects of Sharia, if I look at the treatment of women according to the Quran, the Hadith and the Sharia, with issues like female circumcision, the beating of one's wife, child marriages and polygamy, they're aspects of Sharia which are all part of this and authenticated through the Hadiths, that these are part of it that we don't want in our culture, that we don't want, and we're actually saying that that's where Australian law does not coincide with Islamic law, and so it's an area where you don't have that freedom. So I don't think that Islam is as flexible as maybe Karim wants to say. I think that there's a strong push within Islam to take it back to the original roots of the Quran and the example of Muhammad, and that is quite a strong theme in it.
Can I just say that Islam actually liberates the women, and till this day still liberates women. The system that you have now in place is actually the oppression of women, where a young girl growing up in this society, if she's not got flawless skin, size 8, and doesn't uncover half her body, she's no longer accepted. Islam says no. You will get judged on your character, on your mind, on your intelligence, and on your God-fearingness. So Islam liberates the women, and the Prophet Muhammad came to liberate the woman. And to this day, it's an example. And I personally am appalled that things go on with women of this society, and the standards or this image that we're trying to make little young girls or young women live up to, and making them sex objects, for example. And Islam does away with that. What we say is, yes, it's a totalitarian way of life. We have the solution to gambling, to alcohol, to the surplus of women, to domestic violence, to inheritance, to divorce. You look at the news, you have people in court 5-10 years draining the court systems, costing money, sometimes entering in violence about divorce. Who gets what? Inheritance. Again, who gets what? You read the papers, the police don't have a solution to the problem of alcohol in the city. The alcohol is to blame. What's the solution? Gambling. Again, people that lost their homes, lost their marriage over gambling. What's the solution? Surely no one can say in the social society that we live today is ideal.
Okay.
But I don't think we are saying it is ideal.
But you don't have an alternative, is what I'm saying.
No, we do have an alternative. I have 3 daughters. They don't dress immorally. They're not discriminated against because they don't dress immodestly.
But what I'm saying is the standard of society that makes them believe that.
Yeah. And that is something I just talked to my daughters about, and we sort it out. So I think that we can exaggerate. I think it's common when I listen to Islamic speakers, they will berate the West and say how bad and wicked the West is. And it's a way of promoting Islam by saying how bad the West is. And I think, I don't disagree that the West has got its bad elements. In fact, the West is prepared to acknowledge that. We're not in denial about those things. And we try to deal with them through education. We don't try to compel people. And so with those issues, our approach is not to use compulsion, but instead to educate people, encourage people to do the right thing. Now, it may not be as successful, but we want to make sure that people have got freedom and we don't use compulsion, and that's something we need to take on board.
That brings you in line with Islamic teaching, because Islam says there is no compulsion in religion. And I'm not opposed to the West. I'm a Westerner. I'm from the West. I speak the language of the West. So I class myself as a Westerner. Islam doesn't differentiate where you're from. But what I'm saying is the social standard that we have gotten to, and it's good that you talk to your daughters. That just makes you a smart and a very smart father and a responsible father, that you've told your daughters, ignore what you're saying. That's not what you should strive to be. What I'm saying as a whole and as a general, it's completely the wrong message that we're sending to young women, girls and the young women of society.
So I want to just take our conversation a little bit further and incorporate some of the questions here. So you mentioned a moment ago that ideally we would have the divine law because that is immutable, unchangeable, whereas human law is, logically, according to your system, corrupt. So at what point, 2% now, but at what point, where's the tipping point? Where would you like to see, if the Muslim population was greater, would we transition to a more divine, immutable law in Australia?
I don't think it's an option of ratio. I'm just addressing the point that the Australian community have been feed-mongered, so to speak, that Sharia is coming and the Muslims are here to take over the country. And I'm just saying it's not even on our top 100 things to do in this country right now. We've got a long way to go to improve our image, improve our people, improve shortcomings on us. It's not even in the realm of thought of bringing a Sharia.
Yeah, I think the question though that it's just slipped off the screen is that it may not be on the agenda now, but cast your mind to the future. Perhaps with the UK example in mind, where we now have...
I think you can't answer. Look, if this country was a majority Muslim, then it'd be a good opportunity to bring it in, if the country was a majority Muslim, but you can't speak on hypotheticals. Hypothetically speaking, I would love to travel into space and go to the moon and the red planet, but is it really going to happen? Not in the foreseeable future, so I'm not even really thinking about it. But if this country, or any other country, was a majority Muslim country, then absolutely Islamic law should rule the land.
So, okay, let's just think about that for a moment. And perhaps we can use examples of other countries where Islam is in the majority. What implications does that have then for minority groups? Are they subject to those laws, Kuranda?
Look, I think that we often hype up some of these isolated incidents in some of these countries and then assume that all minorities in Islamic countries are mistreated. And a good example, obviously, is in Egypt when there was some tension between Copts and Muslims. But I think that you'll find, generally speaking, that in most of these countries, where it's possible, because there is corruption, it's not a perfect system, where it's possible, and according to Islamic principles, non-Muslim minorities have to be afforded the same freedoms, privileges, rights as any other group, and they have to be protected. It's a moral responsibility for an Islamic government to protect any of its subjects or citizens,
so just
both historically and today.
So I wonder, is there freedom of speech? Sometimes it's been asked that those posters that we had, MyPeace posters in Australia, could the equivalent posters be put up in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, which said, Jesus is the only way, or something like that?
Jesus, the prophet of Islam. Well, you mean if someone said
that? Is there such freedom in those countries to allow that for minority groups?
I would ask on two things. In a majority Muslim country, Christians are allowed to practice whatever their law says, so they're not subject to Sharia law or Islamic law.
But is there freedom of speech?
Absolutely there is. And again, people say, well, can I do that in Saudi Arabia? Well, I couldn't do that in the Vatican. I couldn't go to the Vatican and put that poster up. And we've gone to war, and we've gone and essentially gone into war. And I don't use that word lightly, but people have died in the name of democracy, right? So as a citizen of the country that went to war, if I'm exercising that democracy, why then am I hearing, can I go to another country to do it? Well, I'm not from another country. I'm an Australian living in Australia, born in Australia, and you're telling me that it's a democratic country. Well, fine, and we have freedom of speech. Great. So I did it. If I was, I couldn't do that in the Vatican, and what other countries choose or choose not to do, that's not my problem. I can't speak on the Chinese. I probably couldn't do that in China. Probably couldn't do it in Italy. I can't speak on behalf of other countries. But in majority Muslim lands, and I'll make this in point, Christians look, the Middle East especially is a lot more advanced as where we are now. And I'm not talking about economically or socially. I'm talking about the religious point of view, where Muslims and Christians live in the Middle East, and religion is not even a point of issue. under Saddam Hussein, the second in charge in Iraq, the second in charge, the vice president of the country was a Christian. And I don't see a day anytime soon where the deputy prime minister will be a Muslim, right? So in Lebanon, the president is Muslim, president is a Christian, Maronite, and the prime minister is Muslim.
Yep. Sam, what do you see as your understanding?
Okay, I just want to pick up on this example of the deputy president of Iraq being a Christian under Saddam Hussein. The Ba'athist Party in Iraq was basically a Stalinist, atheist type government. So I don't know how much you can use Saddam as a representation of...
Well, he was still a Muslim in a Muslim country.
Yeah, but
It was a predominantly Muslim country, and the vice president of that country was a Christian.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, I made that distinction at the beginning that there's a difference between Muslims and what the religion teaches. Mm-hmm. And as we're talking about Sharia, which is an expression of the thought-out attitude of the religion, that's what we need to keep in mind here. So Saddam, was a Ba'athist Stalinist. He's more atheist than he was Muslim in practice, right? The guy just was. The Ba'athist Party based himself on Stalin, and that's how he ruled his country, as Stalin did. So I don't know if you can use that as an example.
But the point is that the people of this country, where we're talking about religious tolerance and two religions living side by side, what I'm saying is it seems to be in this country, maybe some countries in the West, that religious faiths are even a topic of conversation. In places like the Middle East, if you're a Christian, Muslim or Jew or an atheist, it's not even mentioned. It's just a foregone conclusion. Whatever you are, you are.
Well, in that case, I think it's important for us to listen to the people from those areas. So to actually listen to the Copts, to listen to the Syrians, to listen to the Assyrians, to listen to the Lebanese, to actually listen to the Christians from that group and see what they have to say. I mean, you can say one thing, I can say another.
But I've actually lived in Egypt and seen the Copts. I've seen churches getting built and continue to get built. I've seen the treatment they get firsthand. And I look at, and there'll be plenty of Copts that say, no, we're persecuted. I've lived in Egypt. I'm an Egyptian, right? And I've seen it. And the examples are endless. You look at Palestine, with the war that's happening with Israel right now. People think it's a Muslim-Jewish war. It's not. It's a Palestinian, Muslims and Christians of Palestinian background fighting for a common goal, and that's to get their land back. So it seems in these countries that religion seems to be a bit of a, you're a Muslim, I'm a Christian, you've got Jesus, we've got Muhammad, don't try to take over a country. It's a topic of conversation that never should have happened.
It's a good point. In the Middle East, the view towards other religious groups is a bit different to the way we might be here, because it's so obvious when you come here wearing a turban or whatever, you're distinctly different. It takes years before you start to get accepted. But in places like the Middle East, where we have a continuum of civilization, we're talking, and I'm not disrespecting the Aboriginal continuum, but I'm saying post-colonial civilization in Australia is only 200 and so odd years. But in the Middle East, it's thousands of years where you had different minorities or religious groups living side by side. They don't think about it. They don't actually say, oh, he's Christian, he's Muslim. The word for God in the Middle East is Allah for a Christian and a Muslim. So there's that commonality and there's no distinction.
But sorry, Sam, just quickly, I'll come back to you. You mentioned that they're afforded the same rights and protections. We've been discussing freedom of speech, but is there the freedom to switch religion? Can a Muslim in those countries openly say, I've now decided to abandon my faith and adopt another religion?
Well, firstly, I don't believe that there is a fully implemented Sharia-compliant society existing in the world today. But those that profess to be, say, in a limited way, such as Saudi Arabia, no, you can't. You can't leave your religion of Islam and become another faith. You can't take another faith unless you want to be persecuted. And I think that's an injustice in those countries, because they're not implementing Sharia the way that it's supposed to be, so they don't have a right to tell someone.
Does Sharia permit you leaving Islam?
No.
So Sharia doesn't permit it, but so in what way is Saudi?
Saudi is implementing it by law. Okay, so if you leave Islam, if I leave Islam today, that's my problem. It's got nothing to do with him or another person.
But you could use the example that in today's government and today's ruling, that treason, if one commits treason, that's given the death penalty.
But if the divine law is the ideal, and the divine law says that you can't leave the religion,
Yes.
How does that
That's not,
fit?
that's not applicable in a society like Australia. The whole reason for that law coming in the first place was to protect the fabric of society so that it didn't fall into, into, say, civil conflicts or diminish the power of the society, of the community. So if you had people turning away from Islam, the law of that country at the time was to protect the society so that, say, look, you're not allowed to leave Islam because we wanted to maintain unity. That was the whole reason, and that's sort of similar to the... Let me just finish, please. That was similar to the treason example that he's using. The reason we don't accept treason in our society is to protect our country. If you have people going against your values and your democratic system, then the whole country will fall into anarchy. So if we have people going off and going against our country, coming to our country and then trying to undermine it or to destroy it, that's the same concept that Islam
It seems
uses.
like you're making a parallel between a religion and a country.
I'm using the same parallel that Diaa used in terms of treason because it's very similar in terms of the purpose behind it. It's to protect the society, the country.
Yep. Now, I just want to say straight out that the treason example doesn't work because on the one hand we're told that Christians are tolerated and respected and valued in the community, but if you become one, we kill you, right? So it doesn't work. You can't have it both ways. Becoming a Christian does not mean you've committed treason, but this is the example that they give, but it just doesn't work because Christians are meant to be people who can participate, be involved in everything. It's not that you're a Christian, you're committing treason.
Well, let's look at what Islam teaches. Islam teaches that Christians are to be protected, places of worship are to be protected. In fact, there was one scenario where the Prophet Muhammad said, anyone who comes near this church or tries to damage this church, I will forbid paradise on this person. Not on a mosque, on a church. It came to a point where when Syria was conquered, there was a church that the Caliph at the time refused to pray in the church, so Muslims don't take it as their place of worship. They said, no, it's their place of worship, and if we start praying there, then you might get used to this being our place of worship. So now I'm banning anyone praying in this church. Now they took over the church, you know how? Not by the sword, they bought the church eventually, right? So Islamic law teaches to protect the citizens of Christianity, to allow them to practice their faith, to allow them to afford their law. So if they have a law of divorce, inheritance or whatever, they can govern themselves in the Islamic society.
I think we were talking about a case of conversion from Islam to Christianity.
No, he was saying that the case of treason. If one cannot leave this country to go against it, it's treason and it's punishable by death.
Yes, but I'm saying that if a Muslim becomes a Christian, he's not against his government. He hasn't committed treason. And so if Christians are supposed to be respected and honoured within Islamic countries and a Muslim becomes a Christian, why is it that you say, well, you become a Christian, you're liable to death? If these are supposed to be a protected, respected people. I'm saying you can't say Christians are respected, but if you become one, we'll kill you. The two just don't go together.
Well, no, it's a good point, except that we haven't got an Islamic society that we can use as a model for that. We're talking historically, the purpose when an Islamic society was emerging was to protect that society from losing its way. Similar to whether we want to protect our society from spies or from people who want to ruin our society, it's the same law that was there implemented. But today, we don't have that in existence. So if someone wants to become a Christian, there's no one should have the right to tell them not to, because the system is not Islamic in its essence. And so what are they protecting? We don't have a country that's protecting full Islam, you know what I mean? Like even here in Australia, if I were to become a Christian, that's my issue. That's got nothing to do with any other Muslim or any other Muslim regime. And today, apostasy is not an issue and virtually not even worth us talking about.
And can I just say the whole notion that Christians are not respected and this is the thing that really gets me, is the fact that it's an us versus them. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. And in fact, the Prophet Muhammad, who we say is the greatest man to ever live, and the Westerners have said he's the greatest man to ever live, married a Coptic Christian. So if he can marry a Coptic Christian and call this lady his wife, where do you get the notion that Muslims are intolerant towards Christians, or it's us versus them, or there's any kind of different, I'm not saying there's no difference, but that there's an issue?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can answer that. That is, the Quran calls for Christians to be conquered. Surah 9, verse 29, clearly says that if you confess that Jesus is the Son of God, then you are to be conquered. The Arabic word is sagiruna, to be made to be reduced. and to pay the jizya, and that's what's happened to Christians.
So you can pull a parable from the Bible saying anyone who's not a Christian, Jesus says to chop their necks off.
Yeah.
Luke 19:27.
But I'm not doing that. In the reliance of the traveller, it is very clear that it's the responsibility of the Khalifa and the Islamic State to conquer the nations around them and bring them under Islamic control, and that there are differences in the way that Christians are to be treated to the way that Muslims
Isn't
are
that
to be treated.
similar to where we Australians now are going around the world and bombing countries to make them be democratic? Is that not conquering other lands?
I'm going to have to, each of you will get a quick say, but I'm going to have to just ask to wrap. So, Kuranda, if you could share a few final remarks in this discussion, then Sam, and I'll ask Diaa to close.
Well, unfortunately, we run out of time, and there are a lot of issues to discuss, and I think that Islam is a very complex religion. It is not one that's black and white, cutting off hands and this and these certain allegations that we hear, particularly in the media, but from people who don't understand Islam. Some allegations of child marriage, beating the wife, female genital mutilation are not aspects of Islam. Okay, we often associate it with Islam, but they are not aspects of Islam. I do not beat my wife. I do not support female genital mutilation, and I definitely do not support child marriage. Polygamy is an aspect of Islam which Sam mentioned, and that is true, but there are reasons behind that, and to understand it will take much, much more time to explain, so maybe in another event. But I think that one last thing, the most important thing that we need to try and do from particularly with interfaith sort of relations, is to try and learn from each other and share those positive aspects that can make our society better. We can really develop and share ideas, just as we've done with our dress, our architecture and our food, our multicultural food. We can share aspects of our faith and our values and even our so-called approaches to legal systems and make our society much better. And we're doing that now with our halal finance. We're doing that with the halal food industry, and you may find that implemented in some aspects of marriage and divorce. So hopefully Australia will benefit from it.
Sam?
Okay, I guess just in this I would hope that people go away understanding that there is a difference between what a Muslim may believe individually and what the Islamic law teaches theoretically, and that it's important for us to understand that difference, but also not to be in denial about what the Sharia law actually does say. Not to just be saying, I don't like that aspect, it's not authentic, but to actually say, no, what does it say? And as I said, there are books where you can find that out. And I think it is important that we do listen to the minority groups who are living in Islamic countries to hear what they have to say on this.
Thank you. And Diaa?
Just wrapping it all up, the whole notion of Islam versus Christianity, Christianity versus Islam is an issue that was made amongst us. So it's not an issue that's ever been from the Islamic teaching nor the Christian teaching. And I would heavily really recommend everybody to go out and find out yourselves what Islam teaches, judge Islam, and go to a trusted source and look at the reasons why everything is. And you'll come to realize that the Quran pays the highest respect to non-Muslims, to the Jews and Christians, by referring to them as people of the book. And it mentions nowhere to persecute a Christian or a Jew or hate anyone for their faith. In fact, it says the opposite. You should live together, for they are also God-fearing people.
Okay, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panellists.